And before that, I was in Turkey.
Okay.
So it's being live streamed.
It's already streaming on the YouTube, but we'll start sharp at 8. So we have about 4 minutes. While waiting for that, let me just make a quick housekeeping rules for everyone who are already in here. What will happen afterwards? I will just make a brief introduction, and then right after I shall pass the screen to you, and probably we can take about 1.5 hours for your discussion, and then after that we'll open for Q&A. I think the students have a lot of questions that they want to ask. All right, so
Great.
Yeah, so we have about 3 minutes before we start.
Is this lecture, I saw that on the flyer it says required for students of a particular course, but is it like open to everybody? Was it advertised as such?
It's also open to others, but it's compulsory for law students.
Before this, what kind of material have you covered? Have you discussed like the earlier periods, the Abbasids, Umayyads, and so forth? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah, so we finished so far. We covered until, some have already covered on the Abbasid period, but some have covered until Umayyad. Yeah, so but I think it's fine because what is important is for us to see the significant contributions of the Ottoman Empire and how this empire offered a unique features of administration of Islamic law during their administration.
Great. Yes, I will focus mostly on the relationship between a kind of Ottoman governance and law.
Yeah, because I think there are a lot of quite a number of new things that the Ottoman administration introduced, which were not available in the last two empires. So I think that's very important for us. That it will be very interesting for us to learn about that.
So if I use concepts like, you know, the madhab, the waqf, hukum, qada, fatwa, all of these concepts will be familiar, yes?
Yeah, they should be familiar already with those terminologies, because it's already been discussed at the very least when we talked about sources of law, the general idea of the sources of law in Islam.
Great, thank you. So maybe I can try to share.
Can you try? Just for your information, together with us tonight, other than the students, we also have the academic, the staff members, the academic members with us tonight. So yeah,
I'm honored. I don't know if you can see the slides right now.
Yeah, we can.
Good.
Okay, if you're ready, shall we start?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good evening. I bid to all of the participants who are present here in this Zoom. Welcome to our first international public lecture. First and foremost, I would like to extend our appreciation to our students who are very much eager to listen to your lecture. And thank you so much as well to our head of department, Madam Nina Shazmin, for being with us tonight. And of course, we would like to welcome Brother Furqan, our esteemed guest tonight. Thank you so much. Tashakurudum in Turkish. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes. Rica ederim.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to enlighten our students with a very, hopefully, rich discussion on the development of Islamic law during the Ottoman Empire. Just a simple housekeeping rules that I would like to remind all of our participants. Please kindly mute yourself while the lecture is going on. We are going to have this discussion for about 2 hours or so, depending on how active our participants will be in asking questions. But the Brother Furqan will first deliver the lecture, and then after that we'll take about 30 minutes for the Q&A session. So just before we start, let me briefly introduce who is our speaker here. I'm glad that I received a strong recommendation from Prof. Recep, who is actually Brother Furqan's father. So Brother Furqan is currently a doctoral candidate of Middle Eastern, South Asian and African Studies at Columbia University, New York, and he is currently in New York. His research is focusing on the constitutional arrangement of the Ottoman Empire. So a very right person to talk about the development of Islamic law of the Ottoman Empire. And before this, he graduated from the Faculty of Theology in Marmara University, Istanbul. And then right after that, completed a master's degree in a very renowned university in London, comparative political thought at SOAS. So inshallah tonight, Brother Furqan will be with us to answer all your questions about what's new that we can discover from the 650 years of administration of the Ottoman Empire. What's so unique about the administration of the Ottoman rulers, and how, more importantly, how did those systems develop during those days are affecting us today in terms of developing the Islamic law, especially on the mazhab, the existence of mazhab, the evolution of mazhab, and so on. So if you have any questions to ask our speaker here, you may type in the comment section, or alternatively, you can straight away ask the question when the Q&A session is open a bit later. And for those who are watching us on the YouTube, you can also ask questions through the comment section. We'll try to attend to as many questions as possible. And without further ado, I shall pass the screen to our esteemed speaker. Please welcome Brother Furqan.
Thank you very much, dear Mizan. I'm honored to be invited to give a lecture on the Ottoman Empire. And I'm really happy to see that students from Malaysia are interested in learning about the Ottoman Empire. Unfortunately, sometimes we focus on our locality, and I feel I am also guilty of this because unfortunately, I do not have a lot of knowledge about the Malaysian context and the development of Islamic law in Malaysia. So hopefully, inshallah, one day I can attend a lecture on Malaysia as well. So because of this, I'm very grateful to see that, you students from Malaysia are interested in the Ottoman Empire and the development of Islamic law during the Ottoman Empire. So thank you very much. Once again, thank you for inviting. I'm very honored. So I had briefly lined out my kind of educational background, but because Sister Mizan graciously already did the introductions, I will skip this. Thank you very much. So here I would like to go over the outline of topics I will cover today. So first, I will start with a few notes on certain concepts which I hope to make clear so that our discussion is more fruitful. So first of these will be a few notes on Islamic law and what I mean by Islamic law. And then I will have a few comments, very brief, on studying Ottoman law versus studying Islamic law under the Ottomans. So what our attitude kind of means depending on our approach to the topic and how we conceptualize it in our mind. And then I will give a brief introduction by way of presenting a general picture of the history of the Ottoman Empire, and I will here present my idea of periodizing the Ottoman Empire's history from the perspective of legal developments. And then this will be 3 periods. I will cover the first period, the early Ottoman period, the second period, which I call the consolidation period, and then the third period, which is the modernization period. And finally, I will conclude with a remark on what we can learn and from the Ottoman experience. And I will conclude with a kind of overview, general remark on the kind of history, the venture of Islamic law throughout these centuries. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Let me start with a few notes on what I mean by Islamic law. So, the concept of Islamic law as it developed in the West, especially as it was secularizing post-Enlightenment, is not entirely appropriate to is not an entirely appropriate lens through which we can understand the Sharia. It has certain elements, it incorporates certain elements which we cannot find in the Sharia, and it excludes certain elements which we do find in the Sharia. For example, there is a focus on public law, private law. This distinction is not very prevalent in classical Islamic law because the nature of state and governance is very different. And in Islamic law, we have categories of worship, we have categories of norms, which are, for example, mubah, mustahab, makruh, which are disliked, preferred, or just permissible, which we do not find in modern law. Modern law is more concerned with cases that will end up in courts, whereas Islamic law is a more encompassing, it's more like a worldview, it's more of an ethical system as well as being a jurisprudential system. So if we subject the Sharia to modern notions of Islamic law, then this can be cause confusion, and it might obfuscate what we want to do. So we must always keep this in mind when we say Islamic law. And I would like to make this note before I begin, because I believe it's of crucial importance, so that what I say is clearly understood, inshallah. Of course, this debate can go on. It could be a lecture in itself, so I will kind of keep it short here. And now I want to kind of mention what I mean when I say Islamic law. Because Islamic law, as we know, can mean many different things. It has many different forms, but in the context of what I'm studying here, what do I mean? What is that real thing that constitutes the concept Islamic law? So here I have given a definition of my understanding of what the real thing. So it's Islamic law is a network of ideas formulated by a community of experts, which is the ulama, that develop upon the backdrop of a constituted tradition. So these ideas are developed in consideration of a tradition which is constituted in the past by the Prophet ﷺ the companions, and the great scholars, so forth, and the negotiation of the practical emergent conditions with set ideas. So, and then, of course, it's not just constituted in the past. What is constituted in the past is constantly renegotiated with emerging conditions. And this constitutes what I mean by Islamic law. So when I speak about Islamic law, as I said here, a community of experts, I will be speaking mainly about the community of Hanafi experts, which is the Hanafi madhab. So this is important for a few reasons. First of all, the Ottomans, the government and the core societies in Anatolia and in Rumelia. Anatolia is the current part in Turkey, and Rumelia is the part of the Ottoman Empire which used to be in Europe. So were Hanafi. So policies were informed by the Hanafi madhab. Second, my own expertise covers the Hanafi madhab, and I do not feel comfortable making sweeping judgments about other madhabs. And third of all, I'm restrained by time. If I try to go into every madhab and their development under the Ottomans, I'm afraid this would take multiple hours. So because of these, I will focus more on the Hanafi madhab, and when I say Islamic law, I am mostly referring to the Hanafi madhab. So then I want to make a few notes about what it means to be studying Islamic law. So first of all, to understand Islamic law under the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire was established in 1299. Of course, it has its roots before that, when they were a vassal state of the Seljuks, but the official date is considered to be 1299. And the empire collapsed in 1922. So this is, in total, it's 623 years. It's a very difficult task to cover 623 years in just one lecture, 1.5 hours. But I will try to do my best covering key figures and key ideas, which were peculiar to the Ottoman Empire, which you might not see in other places. But in any case, I must clarify by mentioning that what I choose to cover and what I choose to leave out, what I choose to emphasize and what I choose to not emphasize, will inevitably create an emphasis on certain aspects and leave out certain aspects, which will lead to a certain narrative. So here I am building a narrative. I must be clear about that. And my narrative will mostly be employing a constitutionalist perspective, but nevertheless, I'm being frank that after this course, I hope you are kind of motivated to go learn more about the Ottoman Empire. And this lecture should only be taken as a starting point. Hopefully a spark which ignites your curiosity, but unfortunately it cannot sate that curiosity in itself. So what does it mean to be studying, let's say, Ottoman law versus, let's say, Islamic law under the Ottomans, or Islamic law during the Ottoman Empire? So if we use a conceptualization such as Ottoman law, this, I believe, gives unjustified importance to the political structure. It gives primacy to the political structure rather than acknowledging the primacy of Islamic law, which is something I will cover throughout this lecture, and hopefully it will become established. What I mean by that is that we need to remember the important fact that the law that was implemented in the Ottoman Empire, Hanafi law, the Sharia, predated the Ottoman Empire. The Hanafi madhab was well established by the time the Ottomans came around. And second of all, Hanafi law continued to develop outside of the Ottoman Empire as well. It continued to develop in the Caucasus region, in the Golden Horde. It continued to develop in Central Asia, in Transoxiana, Mawara ul-Nahr, the Uzbeks, and other Turkic empires. It continued to develop in South Asia, in India, today's Pakistan, and it continued to develop in Egypt and parts of the Middle East, outside the influence of the Ottoman Empire in terms of politically. So this is something we need to keep in mind, that we are studying Islamic law during the Ottoman Empire. We will pay attention to how Ottoman politics and the law interacted, but we should never, we should always keep in mind that Islamic law had an existence outside the Ottoman Empire as well, before and after. So here I have noted that, and it will become apparent what I'm saying when I start to give examples. So here I want to give a general picture and how I will periodize the 623 years to make it more easily understandable. Of course, again, with every periodization, there will be a kind of a logic. A different person studying the empire from a different perspective could periodize it differently, but I think this periodization I'm using is becoming more and more popular among historians of the Ottoman Empire, and it's used for many different purposes. This map here was supposed to be animated, showing the rise of the Ottoman Empire and the collapse. I don't know if it is animated here, but I assume it's not. But yeah, in any case, the Ottomans, they started as a small principality in the green area you can see here. And they quickly expanded to cover the Balkans, today's Bosnia, Albania, Macedonia, Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, the Crimea, today's Georgia, Armenia, parts of Azerbaijan, Syria, Iraq, today's Sham, Palestine, Egypt, Tunis, Algeria, and also around the Red Sea, and so forth. So they expanded and they achieved great heights, and this was only possible because of their development of Islamic law and administrative practices, that they were able to govern such vast areas with efficiency and ease. So first, I will focus on the period between 1299, the founding of the empire, and the mid-15th century. So here I'm giving rough dates, so to make clear that even when I focus on an event as a turning point, let's say the conquering of Constantinople, Istanbul, we must remember that events do not happen out of nowhere. There is a kind of build-up leading to that event, and we should keep that in mind as well. And then this period is a period where the Ottoman Empire was peripheral from the standpoint of the Hanafi scholarly community. It was at the periphery of Islamic law. As you can see, it was just a minor principality in the west of Anatolia, and it was not central in any case, in any sense. And we will observe that many of the scholars during this period who were active in the Ottoman domains were similar to visiting scholars. They usually were trained elsewhere, and they operated in the Ottoman Empire. The second period, which is I've called the consolidation period, spanned the mid-15th to the early 19th century. And in this period, this period is characterized by the creation of an expansive network of madrasas in the Ottoman Empire, and these madrasas producing their graduates and the emergence of a local network of Ottoman scholars. The Ottoman scholars were trained internally, and they spent most of their careers within the Ottoman Empire as well. So this period witnessed the development of institutions which were novel in a sense to Islamic history in general. We will see how these institutions, they took inspiration from previous institutions, but they were intensification and consolidation of these previous institutions. Offices such as the Sheikh al-Islam, the Qazaskar, and the ordering of these offices, which I will discuss, happened in this period. And the third period was the period of modernization from the early 19th century, 1800s, to the collapse of the empire in 1922. So in this period, the Ottoman Empire engaged in efforts of modernization. Of course, in the beginning, maybe these efforts were they had different motivations, a different scope, but towards the end, it transformed into full-blown Westernization, and eventually Islamic law became almost irrelevant. And in 1922, along with the Caliphate, Islamic law was abolished in Turkey. Of course, the experiences in the last few centuries of the Ottoman Empire, while they do not have a continuation, I mean, explicitly they don't continue, their effect does not persist in the Ottoman, in the Turkish Republic. These effects are felt in other governments of the world, such as Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and I believe in even the more distant parts of the world, especially as we will discover, the Majalla was a big inspiration point for other states undergoing modernization. So let's begin by discussing the early Ottoman period. So as I have noted, the Ottoman Empire did not start as an empire. It started as a principality under the nominal vassalage of the Seljuk Sultanate, which was in turn under the kind of vassalage of the Mongolian Ilkhanid Empire. So in this sense, Ottoman historians debate when did the Ottomans declare their independence. Some trace it a few years here, a few years there. Numismatic evidence is used, but for our purposes, I will just continue with 1299. So to understand the relationship in this period between Islamic law, the Sharia, and scholars, and Ottoman governance, we must understand a couple of things. Mainly, these three things I have listed here. So first, the political nature of the Ottoman Principality. What does it mean to be a principality? What kind of governmental structure is a principality? And two, we must understand the general post-Mongolian context in Anatolia at the time. And three, we must understand the social administrative function of the law. When we understand these three, we're able to understand how Islamic law and the Ottoman Empire, they engaged in a relationship. As you can see here, I have placed a map here of Anatolia in 1300. As you can see, there are multiple principalities: Isfendiyar, Pervane, Kastamonu, Empire of Trebizond, which was a Greek-Roman empire, the Principality of Osman, Karasi, Germiyan, Aydın, Menteşe, Zehre, Eşref, Karaman. There was Armenia, the Byzantine Empire, which was at this point weakened. As you can see, all of these principalities created the political environment of Anatolia, and it was a very chaotic environment. There were many principalities vying for dominance, and it was not certain if any of these would be able to succeed. We when we think of the Ottoman Empire, we think of it as an incredibly successful empire. But as we can see, in the beginning, there was no such guarantee. The Ottoman Empire was merely a principality that was trying to transition from the more traditional nomadic kind of lordship style of governance to a settled proper government. So in this, it is in this context that we must understand. Even in the early years under Osman, the Ottomans used to have two capitals, so to say. They would alternate. So they had not completely abandoned this nomadic lifestyle. And there were elements of the nomadic lifestyle prevalent in their politics as well. They used to manage the state like an army. So all of these we need to keep in mind. There are multiple actors vying for legitimacy and domination in this context. And in this context, we need to understand the social administrative function of the law. And to this purpose, I want to turn to an exemplar of the Sheikh Edebali, who will help us understand what the law meant for the early Ottoman Empire. So Sheikh Edebali started in his studies in Karaman, which was a rival principality to the Ottomans, but completed them later in Damascus. So in that time at Anatolia, there weren't many established centers of learning, and scholars usually had to go elsewhere to complete their studies. And we will see many examples of this. I have placed the map here with a green star on the Karamanids, and you can see the position of the Ottomans. So upon returning to Anatolia, Edebali took residence in Bilecik, which was in Ottoman control, and established a zawiya. A zawiya is like a Sufi lodge, tekke, we say. He was also the leader of the Ahi organization, which was a fraternity of craftsmen, similar to a guild, based on Sufi principles, and they used to formulate the rules of the craft, and they used to self-govern in this way. They used to set fair prices. They used to regulate the market. So Sheikh Edebali was regulating the market in his time. Of course, it's a small market, but he was responsible for that. He would also serve as a teacher, teach students. He would serve as a judge. He would educate between the people, and as well as a mufti. He would answer the religious questions of the people. So in this context, we can see how Edebali had the important role of providing order and stability to the people, where political order was immensely harmed in post-Mongolian context. Figures like Sheikh Edebali filled the void and administered their societies. And Osman Ghazi married the daughter of Sheikh Edebali and became his son-in-law. And this is a very important event. And with this marriage, Edebali became the first judge and mufti of the Ottoman Empire. So he was the prototype for the preceding, for the following chief judges and muftis. So how can we understand this marriage if we were to consider its political significance? I'm not saying that it did not have other causes or significances, but here I want to understand its social political significance. So for that, we need to understand that Edebali possessed two things which were very valuable in the post-Mongolian Anatolian context. Sheikh Edebali represented the legitimacy of the Sharia. He had an authority, and people would listen to him. People would come to him to educate. They would ask for his opinions because of his scholarly authority. Second, Sheikh Edebali was a mufti, a judge, the leader of the Ahif fraternity. So in other words, Sheikh Edebali was an established authority, and he was carrying out the responsibility of administering many aspects of social life. So in this context, he represented a very important opportunity for Osman Ghazi, the founder of the Ottoman Empire. Through this marriage, Osman Ghazi was able to, number one, appropriate legitimacy. By showing himself as a follower of Sheikh Edebali, he was able to tell the people, look, I'm a legitimate authority. I deserve your obedience or your allegiance. Second, he was able to benefit from the administrative capabilities provided by Edebali and his students, which was very important to present the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Principality, as a viable alternative to other principalities in the region. Because many Turks at this time were migrating from the Mongolian, they were escaping the Mongolian invasion. So the Ottoman Empire presented itself as the ideal candidate for as a location to settle, because it was a legitimate empire, and it had good administration. And of course, they were also waging jihad, which on the Byzantines, which boosted their legitimacy as well. Whereas, other principalities, they were fighting amongst each other. The Ottomans were, for the majority, fighting against the Byzantine Empire. So this is the significance of the marriage between Osman Bey, the founder of the Ottoman Empire, this great figure, and he chose to marry the daughter of a sheikh. So he didn't marry the daughter of the Byzantine emperor or something. He chose to marry the daughter of the sheikh. So following this logic of legitimacy and administrative capability, we can understand the subsequent development and creation of madrasas in the Ottoman Empire. So the political environment of Anatolia, in which multiple Turkic principalities vied for superiority, led to the continuation and increase of these concerns of legitimacy and administrative capability. So to address these concerns, to meet this demand, the Ottoman sultans heavily invested in establishing madrasas, which meant, establishing their waqf and creating the compounds. So the purpose for establishing these madrasas was to attract scholars from outside their domain. They had to establish the madrasa, create a salaried position, and then invite the scholars to occupy these positions. So between 1324 and 1451, in the scope of around 80 years, 120 years, 130 years, the Ottoman dynasty established a total of 69 madrasas. I mean, some of them were small, some of them were big, but these madrasas, we should consider them as universities. So between 1324 and 1451, the Ottomans established a total of 69 universities, which shows the importance they placed on attracting scholars from outside their domain. So the prestige of the madrasas were parallel to the size of their waqf. And the waqf is when somebody endows a certain amount of land and says that the income of this land will be used to fund this waqf. So, for example, a waqf which had more land could pay its instructors and its workers, the imam of the masjid, the bath, the hospital, so forth, more. So it became more prestigious. So a stratification emerged between the madrasas, but in an unofficial way. So let me go over a few notable scholars to stress the point I made about the Ottomans not being an established learning center at this point and attracting from outside. So one of the earliest and most prominent Ottoman scholars was Davud Kayseri. Kayseri is is located today in the central Anatolia, but more so towards the east of central Anatolia. So he was known for his commentary on Ibn Arabi's Fusus al-Hikam. He was a great scholar, but he studied first in Kayseri in Anatolia, then completed his studies in Egypt. As you can see, he moved outside Anatolia to complete his studies. And then there were these three figures, Ahmedi, Sheikh Bedreddin, and Shamsuddin al-Fanari, who dominated the scholarly landscape in the 15th century, early 15th century. And all of these scholars studied in Cairo under the famous Hanafi scholar, Ekmeluddin al-Babarti, which is a very important scholar in Hanafi history. And then there was al-Harawi, Sayyid al-Ali Ajami, Fakhruddin al-Ajami, in the mid to late 15th century. So these scholars came from the regions around today's Iran. Al-Harawi was a student of the famous Taftazani, and the latter two, Sayyid Ali Ajami and Fakhruddin al-Ajami, were the students of the famous Sayyid Sharif al-Jurjani, who these scholars are known more so for their kalam works, but they are the pinnacles, they're considered the pinnacles of their period in terms of the development of kalam. And then there were scholars such as Siraj al-Din al-Halabi, who came from Transoxiana, Mawara al-Nahr, Central Asia. And then there was a scholar, Sharaf al-Din al-Qirimi, who came from the regions north of the Black Sea, from Crimea. As you can see, there were multiple scholars. These were the most prominent scholars in the Ottoman Empire who were teaching at these madrasas, and they came from all corners of the Islamic world. They were not educated in the Ottoman Empire. And in this period, probably towards the end of the reign of Murad II, the father of Sultan Mehmed Fatih II, the positions of Shaykh al-Islam and the Kazaskar were created. So the Shaykh al-Islam was the top authority for fatwas, and he was usually the Mufti of Istanbul, but he was not, as an authority, he was not placed above other scholars. What his authority signified was that he was the Mufti, kind of the chief advisor on matters of the Sharia to the Ottoman dynasty. So he was not, he did not control what the other scholars could or could not say, but rather the Ottomans would ask him for their views for when they had to judge on an issue. And there were two Kazaskars. Initially it was one, and then it was increased to two. The Kazaskar means Qadi al-Askar, the judge of the army. So these judges, one was for Rumelia, which is the area of the Ottomans in the Balkans, in Europe, and the other one in Anatolia, controlled the judicial structure, the appointments of judges, dismissals, and so forth. And the Kazaskar used to join the imperial council. When the council met to discuss matters of state, the Kazaskar would be part of this council, but the Shaykh al-Islam would not be part of the council. And here you can see a depiction of the imperial council. This is from the time of Sultan Fatih. So this is a little anachronistic here, but I just wanted to show you that you can see the figures here. And if you look at the room in the center, towards the right of the room, just above my head, you can see two figures with immensely large imamas. And these are the two Kazaskars. So they were part of the imperial council. So, but despite the emergence of such offices, and they were not integrated into a whole. So they were loosely they were operating based on loosely formulated customs, which were sometimes not followed. For example, there were some customs about the ranks a scholar would go through, but it was common that, you know, one scholar would suddenly jump from one rank to 5 ranks above him, or it was possible that a scholar would come from outside the empire and he would immediately start in one of the most prestigious positions without going through the steps of the career steps, so to say. So here I want to kind of wrap up my discussion on this period by kind of summarizing what I've said so far, the most important aspects of what I've said. So the socio-legal order provided by Islamic law and the Sufi fraternities was more durable and better established and legitimate than the rising political order the Ottomans set to establish. So the legal order was more durable. In the wake of the collapse of the Seljuks and the principalities warring, Islamic law continued to serve the community as it always did, from as in the Seljuks and before. So the Ottomans established prestigious madrasas and worked these madrasas to attract prominent scholars who legitimized their rule and increased their administrative capabilities. So there was a cyclical relationship where the scholars provided the Ottomans with something, a benefit, and the Ottomans also provided the scholars with madrasas where they could teach and operate and carry out their mission. So this created a co-constitutive relationship between the scholarly body, who represented the legal order, and the dynastic apparatus, which represented the political order. So they were in a co-constitutive relationship where each of them had a distinct role to play. And their roles, their important roles, based on their socio-legal functions, helped to define their boundaries, their jurisdictions, and it was the underlying logic, so to say, of a constitutional arrangement of the Ottoman Empire. And this arrangement was very important in the following periods as well. So in the period of consolidation, which started in the mid-15th century with the conquest of Constantinople, this period is characterized by the effort to organize the empire and consolidate its institutional character. So in the context of Islamic law, this enterprise was built on the basis of the co-constitutive relationship of law and power. So this informal principle was enshrined in institutional arrangements and was made clear and was given institutional force. So the early seeds of these developments were, of course, planted in the earlier period with the Shaykh al-Islam and Kazaskar, but they were not made into a coherent, consolidated whole. This only happened with Sultan Mehmed Fatih. So Ottoman historians today, especially Baki Tezcan and Leslie Pierce, and then following them, Guy Barak with his own kind of thesis, present this period as the second formation of the Ottoman Empire, the second Ottoman Empire. So we should consider the Ottoman Empire before this as a principality, operating more on a dynastic kind of with traces of nomadic lifestyle. But after this, we should consider the Ottomans as a centralizing, established empire, gunpowder empire, similar to other Mediterranean and Asian empires. So the conquest of Istanbul altered the self-perception of the empire, as I said. They no longer thought of themselves as nomads. They saw themselves as the inheritors of the Roman Empire. And Sultan Fatih used to call himself Kayseri Rum, the Caesar of Rome. So he saw himself as gathering the titles of Sultan, the great kind of Turkic, this title, Sahib Quran, these are all important titles, and Caesar, Rome, Caliph. They used the title of Caliph as well in this period. And with the conquest of Egypt, of course, they formally acquired the caliphate. So between 1453 and 1480, along with this development, Mehmed II engaged in a series of reforms by promulgating sets of laws, which are called Kanun Names. Kanun means like law, Name means book in Persian. So it's just a law book, which codified the dynastic traditions of the Ottomans. So things that had been going on based on convention and precedent were codified and put in law manuals. So these Qanun Names addressed important aspects of government, such as defining the roles and jurisdictions of officials, and they regulated tax regimes. For example, which lands were taxed in what way, which lands were waqf, which lands were property of the dynasty, which lands were private property, who paid what kind of tax based on, dhimma, ushur, if they were Muslim or non-Muslim, so forth. So they produced detailed plans for these administrative matters. So the most important of these qanuns for our purpose was issued towards the end of Mehmed II's reign and regulated the professorial and judicial posts in the empire. So this created a hierarchy among the scholars and delineated a clear scholarly career path, where a graduate of one of these Ottoman madrasas could enter this path and follow it to the top. And here, I have placed a graphic. It's in Turkish, but here you can see that in there were minor posts. Then the Qadi would move to a more major post. He would continue. Then he would become the Qadi of Istanbul, and from there he would become the Qazaskar. So there was a clear path. But this was for the Qada, of course. There were also the madrasas, which I will come to. So the rise of the Shaykh al-Islam also happened in this consolidation period in the reign of Sultan Suleiman. So Sultan Mehmed II, after him there was Sultan Bayazid II, and then after him there was Sultan Selim, who conquered Egypt, and then after him there was Sultan Suleiman, which was the peak of the Ottoman Empire. So in the Qanunnameh promulgated by Mehmed II, the role of the Shaykh al-Islam was outside the hierarchy still. So even though Mehmed II went great distance in consolidating and defining everybody's roles and the hierarchy, this project was not fully completed. This integration of the Shaykh al-Islam in the hierarchy and integration of all professorial, judicial, qada, fatwa, tadris, everything happened during the reign of Sultan Suleiman under the direction of Abu Sud Effendi, who occupied the position of Shaykh al-Islam. And I will focus on the life and works of Abu Sud Effendi to provide an insight into how this happened. And Abu Sud Effendi is an extremely important figure, and I want to spend some more time discussing him. So Abu Sud Effendi was born in 1490. His father was a prominent Sufi sheikh by the name of Sheikh Muhyiddin al-Mawsi, who was a close acquaintance of Sultan Bayazid II, the son of Sultan Fatih. And Sultan Bayazid II was also known as Bayazid the Sufi, because he was extremely pious, and he really strengthened the waqfs and the madrasas and honored the scholars to extreme extents. And Abu Sud Effendi started with a modest post in Çankırı, which is in central Anatolia, after graduating from the Ottoman madrasas. So he was completely educated within the Ottoman Empire. So this is a very important departure from the previous periods. And then he quickly moved through the hierarchy, became Qazaskar of Rumelia during Sultan Suleiman's reign, and finally in 1545, after 8 years of serving as Qazaskar, he became the Shaykh al-Islam of the empire. One of the most important developments in this period was the rise of the office of Shaykh al-Islam. Abu Sud Effendi himself was so charismatic, he was acknowledged as such a great scholar that because he was Shaykh al-Islam, the salary of the Shaykh al-Islam was raised. When he wrote his tafsir, which was considered an amazing tafsir, Sultan Suleiman increased his salary from 200 aspers, silver coins, daily to 100, and then to 300, and then 5, and then eventually it became 600 aspers. This was way above the salary of the Qazaskar. So to reflect this reality, the Sultan Suleiman issued an edict that the Shaykh al-Islam would be above the Kazaskar, and the Shaykh al-Islam would control the appointments of everybody, whether it be professors at the madrasas or judges. The Shaykh al-Islam would control all of these appointments. And any issues the judges had, they had to raise it to the Shaykh al-Islam to be answered. And here you can see a miniature painting of Abu Sud Effendi responding to a petition. And as you can see, miniature paintings are symbolic. The person asking the petition, he looks like a scholar as well, based on his imamah. He's drawn as a tiny figure, whereas Abu Sud Effendi is drawn as this great, magnificent figure. So in miniature paintings, oftentimes the size of the figure represents their prestige, that they have an important position. And here you can see it says Fetavai Sherif Hazreti Şeyhül İslam merhum Ebu Suud Rahimahullah alayh. So this is from a history book describing Abu Suud Effendi responding to these fatwas. So Abu Suud Effendi, with the integration of the Shaykh al-Islam at the highest level, and this was, of course, these laws, Qanun Names, were written by Abu Suud Effendi. Sultan Suleiman asked Abu Suud Effendi to write the Qanun Names. The process was completed, and the full integration of all these offices and roles in the empire was completed. So, and Abu Suud Effendi in this period issued some regulations on who could be appointed where, and he created a system of internship. When a young scholar graduated from the Ottoman madrasas, he would enter into a system called mulazamet. He would become an assistant to a scholar who was already serving at a higher level in the hierarchy. And every 7 years, these scholars could acquire new interns. And through this internship, then the scholars would move on to becoming judges of their own, and they would proceed through the ranks. So with this development, the system, Ottoman system, was kind of close to outsiders. Now, if somebody came from, let's say, Egypt, or they came from Transoxiana, Mawara al-Nahr, or they came from Iran, it was difficult for them to get a position at Ottoman madrasas or get an Ottoman judgeship, because they did not go through the mulazamat system. They had to graduate from these Ottoman madrasas. This was a reflection of how the madrasas were established, how many graduates they had, and how the Ottoman Empire became self-sufficient in terms of producing its own legal experts and administrators. And Abu Suud Effendi also created some rules regarding fatwa petitions and a way to write them, which made answering very easy. So the scribes in his office would formulate the petition in such a manner, saying, if Zayd the person does such and such acts to Amr, would it be necessary for him to be punished according to this rule in this fiqh book? So the question would beg the answer, so to say. And then the Abu Suud Effendi would just say, Olur, yes. Or he would say, they would ask, would this and such would be jaiz? Would it be allowed? And Abu Suud Effendi would say, Olur, yeah, it would be jaiz. So through this method, Abu Suud Effendi's office could respond to thousands of fatwas a day. And this contributed to the centralization and consolidation of the empire, because more and more judges, even in the peripheries of the empire, could send their inquiries, because in Islamic law, when a judge cannot find the solution to a particular case, they are tasked with writing to a more informed mufti for their opinion. So when these judges in the provinces, Ottoman provinces, wrote to the center, they were able to receive a quick response. And this really contributed to the overall legal coherence and consolidation of the Ottoman Empire. And here you can see a more detailed diagram of the Ottoman hierarchy and the career path for scholars. So in the beginning, the student would start as a graduate. He would enter the system of mulazama, and from there he would either move to become a judge of a town, and from there, usually their career path would end there. And the people who chose this career path were usually students who were either not very ambitious, or they lived in the extreme peripheries of the empire, so they did not have ambitions of following a more government track. But otherwise, they would start as instructors at madrasas, and they would go through the ranks of the madrasas. The madrasas were ranked according to their daily salary. They would start with 20 aspers daily, 30, 40, 50, 60, and their salary would increase. And eventually, from one of these madrasas, they would transfer to a judgeship, a prominent judgeship of a large territory or important territory. And then they would become the judge of Bursa, Edirne, and then judge of Mecca or Medina. And from there, they would be promoted to the judge of Istanbul. And then from the judge of Istanbul, the next step of the promotion would be Kazaskar, the Anatolian Kazaskar, and from Anatolian Kazaskar, Rumelian Kazaskar. And from there, they would reach, they would become the Mufti of Istanbul, which was the Sheikh al-Islam. So this whole system was created, and scholars from their graduation until the end of their career, they could expect a stable kind of predictable journey through the stages. So what did this hierarchy signify? So when we contrast Sheikh Edebali and the informal arrangement that existed at the time with Abu Sud Effendi, differences between the early period and the latter period become clear. However, Sheikh Edebali, he received his education outside the Ottoman Empire. Before Osman Bey even approached him, he was already known as a prominent scholar, a Sufi sheikh, and he was the head of the fraternity, Ahi fraternity, the guild. So he had his own charisma, so to say. Abu Sud Effendi, on the other hand, he had a charisma of his own as well, but he was trained in Ottoman institutions, and his scholarly prestige was always commensurate to the position he held in the Ottoman Empire. So does this mean that the hierarchy served to co-opt scholars, that the Ottoman Empire could dominate scholarly production and dictate what the Sharia could or could not formulate? So I argue against this position. So first of all, we need to understand that the hierarchy was formulated by the scholars upon the request of scholars, because the scholars saw it in their own interest that their positions, their career paths were clearly defined, so that if there was any injustice, that somebody was from nowhere appointed to a position, then they could say that this is against custom, this is against Qanun, that this appointment should not be allowed. So they could defend their own interests in this way. Once the Qanuns were promulgated, they became a constant reference point for the Sultan scholars defending their positions against the encroachment of the sultans. By referring to the Qanun, they could accuse the Sultan of going against the established dynastic social contract between them. So the Qanuns were like a codification of the social contract between the various parts of the empire and the dynasty. The Janissaries had their own qanuns, the guilds had their own qanuns, the Sufi tariqas had their own qanuns. So these qanuns were officialization of codification of the relationship between the center, the dynasty, and these institutions. So they had a constitutionalist perspective, they had a constitutionalist function in this sense. So I want to re-emphasize and kind of reiterate the constitutional function of this hierarchy. So the Ottoman scholars began to see themselves as an autonomous unit responsible not to the Sultan himself, but they saw themselves as part of a whole that made the empire, as an institutional part of the whole. So the Ottoman Empire for them was an impersonal order. The Sultan was important because he was the figure, he was the linchpin, but it could be somebody else in his place as well. What was important was the dynastic tradition was more important. So this perception was crucial in the struggle in the the latter half of the consolidation period after Sultan Suleiman, between the absolutist reformist sultans and the traditionalist, or let's say constitutionalist scholarly class aided by the Janissaries, which marked that period. So I mean, the Janissaries of course also had their economic interests and so forth, but from the perspective of this perspective, I can't go into that. I want to focus more on the relationship between law and the Sultan. So for example, Osman II, who wanted to boost his own powers, increase his own powers and engage in reform, was executed with a fatwa from the Shaykh al-Islam in 1622. Ibrahim was executed 1648. Ahmed IV was executed in 1687. Mustafa II was executed in 1703. Ahmed III was executed in 1730. And Selim III was executed in 1807. And Mustafa IV was executed in 1808. And these sultans were executed because they failed in properly administering justice, and they failed to satisfy their subjects, and they were often seen as overstepping their boundaries. For example, when Selim III was executed with a fatwa of the Shaykh al-Islam, the fatwa explicitly mentioned that Selim III tried to bring in westernized reforms, and he was executed for that. So and in these fatwas, reference was made not just to the Sharia, that these people are contradicting the Sharia. Reference was also made to the fact that these sultans were contradicting the qanuns. They used to say qanun qadim, the ancient qanuns, the ancient customs of the Ottoman Empire. So oftentimes a dichotomy is proposed between qanun and the Sharia. But here we can see that such a dichotomy did not exist in the minds of the sultans, the minds of the scholars. For them, the qanun was a supporting structure which was necessary for the efficient functioning of the Sharia. For example, the qanun regulated tax regimes. The qanun regulated the salaries of the janissaries. The qanun regulated the operation of the crafts guilds, and the qanuns regulated the price regime set in the markets. So for the Ottoman scholars, it was a welcome development that these qanuns were codified similar to the Sharia. They were put in books, and they could be used as a legal text, legal evidence, when the rulers overstepped their own boundaries. So after Fatih Sultan Mehmed, consequent rulers, and especially after Sultan Suleiman, who was called the lawgiver, other sultans could not change the qanun based on their whims and desires. They had to create
they had to create commissions. They had to acquire, they had to get popular support when they wanted to change a qanun. And it was against this, the sultans felt suffocated. One hand the Sharia, on the other hand the qanun, and they wanted to reacquire their power, reestablish their power, because they wanted to enact sweeping reforms. They wanted to abolish the Janissaries, they wanted to abolish the Awqaf, they wanted to abolish the scholarly structure, because of, I mean, the reasons for that were the Ottomans were losing wars in Europe, and they saw that they, first of all, in the beginning, they saw the Janissaries as the primary cause, because they wanted to move to a disciplined army in a Napoleon style. But the Janissaries saw this as a disciplinary measure, which impinged on their personal freedoms. This conscription-based domination of society in its entirety was rejected by the Janissaries and the ulama. But eventually, what happened was that the defeats were so severe, and the Ottomans had to enter into treaties with the European powers that dictated their own internal structure. I will cover that. And because of this, the struggle between absolutist sultans and reformists, of course, you know, these absolute sultans were not by themselves. There were statesmen around the sultans as well. These actors won the struggle slowly, and the Janissaries were abolished and so forth. I will go over that right now in the modernization period. So the modernization period is usually taken to start with the Tanzimat Edict. But as we will see, modernization efforts had started way before. They had started by the 19th century. Modernization had started, and we can trace the history of modernization into the earlier periods. I will now focus on the Treaty of Küçük Kaynarca, which was signed between the Russians and the Ottomans, and I will present this treaty to you as a way to understand how the Ottomans were pressured, and how they felt it was necessary to enact these reforms that completely altered the landscape in terms of Islamic law. So the treaty had many heavy, heavy requirements, conditions, but the most important I want to focus on is that Russia had itself recognized as the protector of the Orthodox Christian subjects of the empire. So what this meant was that whenever there was a dispute among the Orthodox Christian subjects of the empire, the Russian embassies, which were then opened, would adjudicate these disputes. And it was not the Ottomans who could adjudicate these disputes. Second, this treaty gave the Russians free pass between the Bosphorus and the Gallipoli Straits. So the Russians could leave the Black Sea, and the Ottomans were supposed to be able, like they were supposed to let them do that. And you can see the territories that were lost with this treaty. The red striped areas were the areas that were immediately handed to the Russians, and the yellow striped areas were where independent Crimean Khanate was created, which then was annexed by the Russians. So the Ottomans lost the entirety of this territory, as well as some of their control of their own subjects to the Russians with this development. So here you can see how there was an immense pressure brought on by military defeats, which forced the Ottomans to change their own internal working, their own internal legal structures. And these types of defeats were what eventually pushed the Ottoman society over the edge. I'm simplifying a little bit, over the edge with regards to the struggle between the scholars, the traditional constitutionalist Janissary scholars, and the reformist sultans. And eventually, the Janissary corps were disbanded, and a new standing army was created in the European style. Now, I want to go over some of the notable legal developments in this period. I do not have time to go over each and every one of them, but I will mention a few words where I can to describe what each of these are. So first was the first of the legal codes in the Ottoman Empire was issued in 1838, and it was a penal code which was based on the sources of the Sharia for the most part. In 1837, the Ottoman Sultan Mahmud II started the process by which the waqfs were abolished. So before this period, the waqfs had their own mutawallis. They had their own administrators, and they would operate based on the criteria laid down by the endower, the person who made the waqf. In 1837, there was office was created which took control of all the awqaf and started to control them from the central government. And it's not just awqaf. This is a very significant development because, as we said, the madrasas were funded by the awqaf. So once the awqaf were abolished in this way, and the central government took control of them, it effectively meant that the central government had control of all the madrasas and the scholars. And in this period, there was a rapid decline in the salaries of the scholars. The income from these awqaf were used for military or administrative purposes, and they were no longer paid in full to the ulama themselves. In 1838, a Supreme Council of Judicial Ordinance was created. It's called the Mejlis-i Valai Ahkam Adliye, which served as a Supreme Court and as a court in which the central government would decide on matters. So any judge, whatever he decided, could be overturned in this court. Such a structure did not exist before the creation of this court. There was an unofficial process of appeal, but usually in the Ottoman Empire prior to this, it was not accepted that once a qadi gave a verdict, another qadi could overturn that verdict, unless some kind of grave error was recognized. And there was even a qanun to this effect that was promulgated in the 18th century, commanding the judges to never hear a case once it has been decided on by another judge. And then in 1839, the Tanzimat Edict was issued. As you can see, even before the Tanzimat Edict, there were significant developments. In 1840, another penal code was issued, again modeled on Islamic law. In 1840, new courts were created called the Nizamiya courts. And these Nizamiya courts were the result of the treaties the Ottomans signed with the European powers, in which these European powers demanded that the Ottomans, whenever there was a dispute between a foreign national and an Ottoman subject, they demanded that this dispute be resolved according to secular law, according to codes, for example, the French law or so forth. And peculiarly, if the Nizamiya court passed a verdict, let's say between a French national and Ottoman subject, the French consulate, if it did not agree with this verdict, could overturn the verdict issued by the Nizamiya court. In 1850, trade code was promulgated, which was a translation of the French Code of Commerce. In 1854, a new school was opened for the training of judges, Mektab Nuwab, which was parallel to the madrasas. In this school, these judges were taught the codes. They were not taught the Sharia, according from fiqh books, in the traditional function of the madrasas. They were taught the codes. So they were taught to apply the codes as just judges applying positive law. In 1854, another penal code was issued, this time based on French criminal law. In 1853 and 1856, the Ottoman-Russian Crimean Wars happened, where the Ottomans were able to defeat the Russians, but only with the help of the French and the British, which then imposed, again, crippling conditions on the Ottoman Empire. And one of them was the Islahat Edict, which gave the non-Muslim population of the Ottoman Empire more rights than the Muslim subjects. So here you can see how the European powers were interfering in the internal affairs of the Ottomans by using the minorities as an excuse. And the Ottomans had to concede these because, number one, they were weak on the battlefront, and number two, they were afraid of these minorities rebelling because of nationalist sentiments. So they had to appease them. They had to give them more and more rights in the hopes that, you know, their nationalist rebellions could be suppressed. So in 1858, another penal code, along with a new land law, were passed, which were again, you know, based on French law. In 1870 and 1877, Ahmet Cevdet Pasha drafted the Majalla, which I will discuss. And 1879, a Ministry of Justice was created. In 1888, an edict gave the Sharia courts jurisdiction over family law, according to the Majalla, and there was no code about the family law. And in Nizamiya courts, jurisdiction over criminal commerce and so forth, and any of the remaining areas would only be judged in the Sharia court if both parties agreed on that. If one of them said, I don't want the Sharia court, then it was judged in the Nizamiya courts. So there was a dual legal system. In 1914, the jurisdiction of the Nizamiya courts was extended such that the Sharia courts only saw very limited number of cases regarding some divorce issues and so forth. And in 1922, the Ottoman Empire, alongside what remained of Islamic law, was abolished. So let's focus on Ahmet Cevdet Pasha as a microcosm of what was happening in this period. So Ahmet Cevdet Pasha was born in today's Bulgaria. After studying there, he continued his studies in Istanbul. He started his career as a judge in today's Albania, and then he quickly advanced through the ranks. And in 1866, he was made the head of the Divan Ahkam Adliye, which was a continuation of the Meclis-i Valayi Ahkam Adliye. Here you can see the third item. So he was made the head of that court. In 1873, he became the Minister of Awqaf, and later in the same year, he became the Minister of Education. In 1875, he was made the Minister of Justice. After this, he continued to serve as the Minister of Justice, and in different periods, he was assigned to different posts, but 5 times he was assigned to be the Minister of Justice. And in 1870 and 77, there was a debate on how to adopt a civil code. There were proponents of adopting the French civil code, translating it, just as they had done the French commercial law, commerce law. So Ali Pasha was the proponent of adopting the French code. Ahmet Cevdet Pasha, on the other hand, defended the notion that the Sharia was sufficient to create a modern codified civil code, So work for this started in 1870, and the Majalla was a codification of legal rules from within the Hanafi madhab. So they chose rules from within the madhab. It included maxims such as, a thing shall remain as it was originally, al-aslu baqa'u shay' ala ma kan, and necessity renders prohibited things permissible, al-darurat tubihu al-mahdurat, which are universal maxims, and I'm not sure, maybe you have heard of these, as well as more specific rules regarding the particulars of commerce law, such as, saying compensation is done accordance with the kind of thing compensated for, and these kind of maxims which were used in the courts. So the most important question that arises in this context is the question of whether we should take these documents, such as the Majalla, as an aspect of continuity within the Hanafi tradition, the traditional forms of Islamic law, or change, disruption. So my view is that the Majalla represented a break in Islamic law, and for two main reasons. Number one, the Majalla was to be implemented in the Nizamiya courts, not in the Sharia courts. And it was implemented by judges trained in the Majlis al-Nuwab, the parallel legal school. So the purpose of codifying these laws was to enable these judges to just memorize the codes so they could apply it as positive law. Whereas the traditional logic of Shari'i education in courts is that, every verdict is like an ijtihad, that the scholar considers his own, his full educational background, the Hanafi madhab, all the views within, and judges accordingly. And he judges with his own scholarly authority, in a sense. But here, these scholars from these graduates of the Majlis al-Nuwab, the legal school, were judging based on their diploma, their certification, and they did not have a formal Shari'i training. And perhaps more importantly, the Majalla did not rely on the existing forms of rule formulation, the methodology of rule formulation, usul al-fatwa, adab al-fatwa, which characterized the Hanafi madhab. As stated, I made the definition of Islamic law in the beginning, where I said it is a network of ideas that develop upon a backdrop of the tradition and a negotiation of present realities with that tradition. So the Hanafis had developed a certain legal methodology for this negotiation, upon how to do that negotiation. So the Majalla represented a departure from that mode of negotiation to a new mode of negotiation. And this mode of negotiation was based on choosing whatever view in the Hanafi madhab was more strong, unless it was inconvenient. So the more important factor, which they mentioned in the preamble for the Majalla, was that they chose the views which were easiest for the people and the most suitable for contemporary needs. So they departed from the internal logic of Hanafi rule formulation. For example, there were rules in the Hanafi madhab which were considered weak, but they chose to implement those views. In any case, some scholars have argued that this should be seen as a continuity, as an effort to salvage the tradition. And among them is mostly Sami Ayyub. He has a book titled Law, Empire, and the Sultan. In that book, he has argued for continuity. But my personal view, and which is echoed by Wa'il Hallaq in the US, which has books in English, you can read his Sharia, and also Murtaza Bedir, who is a prominent Islamic legal scholar in Turkey. He has an article called From Fiqh to Law, Secularization Through Curriculum. In that article as well, he goes over the reasons why he considers this to be a disruption. So I want to conclude with a small analysis, constitutional analysis of the overall picture in the Ottoman Empire within these 3 periods. So we trace the development from 1299 to 1922. Of course, we skipped many parts. I tried to bring forth examples from the figures of Osman Bey, Sheikh Adabali, Mehmed II, and then I talked about Sultan Suleiman, Abu Sud Effendi, and then I talked about the reforms, in particular, during the time of Mahmud II, and then Ahmed Cevdet Pasha, to give you a sense, a taste of what the Ottoman Empire offers in terms of problems and maybe solutions as well. But of course, this has been a very rapid kind of overview. But I have employed a constitutionalist narrative. I have tried to trace the relationship between law and power within the Ottoman Empire in these 3 periods I have examined. So I could have, it is possible to examine the Hanafi law by itself. For example, we could analyze how the views considered authoritative in the 14th century were substituted for other views in the 15th, 16th, 17th. We could do that without reference to politics and power as well. But here I have employed a constitutional analysis. I have not gone into political economy as well. I have not gone into military history, but I have alluded that these were very important in driving the change in the consolidation period and in the modernization period. So by 1870, the Ottoman Empire, at which point it could be described as a state, saw in itself the competence to constitute a legal order through its own will. So they were issuing codes, French code, and so forth. It was being issued by on the authority of the Sultan, and it was being implemented. So this signifies that the Ottoman Empire, as a political entity, started to self-constitute its own legal order. As we saw in our analysis of the previous 2 periods, the relationship between the scholarly class and the dynastic apparatus was marked by a co-constitutive relationship. So the Ottoman Empire could not constitute its own legitimacy, its own legal order. It had to invite scholars, or it had to give scholars the power to constitute. It had to give room for the scholars to constitute the legal order and provide it with legitimacy. So this logic of the relationship, the interplay between legitimacy and power, which defined an era, had thus come to an end by the 19th century. And in 1922, in the 20th century, it was completely abolished in the creation of the Turkish Republic. So we must realize that after the 19th century, Islamic law came to acquire a very different meaning. So when we look at Islamic law and the sources of its sources, its logic, how it was produced, how a particular legal opinion acquired the description of legality, was very different from how in the 20th century it acquired the notion of legality. So here I have focused on the Ottoman Empire, but the Majalla, to conclude, the Majalla constituted the foundations for the constitution-making efforts in Egypt, in Syria, and Iraq. And the effect of the Majalla and Ottoman reforms continued in Egypt until the 1930s, 40s, and Iraq in 1920s, 30s. But eventually, these efforts were all abandoned, and today, Majalla-style rules are not implemented. It happened with the secularist revolutions in the Arab world in this manner. Of course, in other contexts such as India, Indonesia, and Malaysia, there's a different story. There's a colonization, But here, as we can see in the Ottoman Empire, while there was no official colonization, there was an immense pressure to conform to European models, and the Europeans were actually able to interfere in an indirect manner in the internal working of the empire through the treaties they had the Ottomans sign. And I do not know the answer to the question whether Islamic law was the cause of this decline, but I think that the second period, which we examined, the consolidation period, presents a unique opportunity to look at how there was a rearrangement of political structures in an authentic manner, without the influence of the Europeans, without the influence of external actors. Things were done. The Ottoman Empire centralized itself. It created new technologies of administration, which allowed it to dominate areas which was impossible before these techniques were invented, but these were done following the logic. I have presented a little of my views here as well. You can feel, and you're free to disagree. And if you want sources on any of the periods or any of the topics I have discussed so far, please, you can reach out to me. I forgot to mention, I was going to put my email here, but I forgot. I will write it in the chat. And this is a postcard from 1904, I think, showing the Young Turk Revolution, where they are breaking the chains of this woman, figure of the woman, because they overthrew Abdul Hamid. And you can see something that looks like an angel flying with it says Hurriyet, Musawat, and Ukhuwat. So it says Égalité, Fraternité, and liberty, égalité, and fraternité. Liberty, equality, and brotherhood, right? So it's just French ideals, and I'm just leaving this here as a interesting insight into the political reformers of the 20th century in the Ottoman Empire. And thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to your questions. And I guess, yes, I'll leave it to you, Sister Mizan. Thank you very much.
Inshallah, thank you so much, Brother Furqan. That was really fascinating sharing. I find it very intrigued, and I hope that we can hear more. But for the time being, we'll stop here for a while. I personally have a lot of questions, but let's prioritize the question coming from the students first. We have a question from Omar Hisham. He asked, is it true that fratricide was allowed by the scholars in the Ottoman Sultanate?
So I just put my email, by the way. If you have further inquiries, you can email me at this address. So the question of fratricide, it's a tricky question. I don't want to take too much time, but it was also issued as an order by Sultan Mehmed II. It was in response to a Turkic tradition that stipulated that stated that the dynasty is the property of the male members of the dynasty. So whenever the Sultan died, his sons had equal claim to the dynasty, to the empire. And this would lead to immense civil war every time. Civil wars happened after the death of pretty much all of the Ottoman sultans. And when Timur invaded Anatolia, the Timurid dynasty. They invaded Anatolia. You know, the Ottoman Empire collapsed for a brief period, and then there was immense infighting. So Sultan Fatih issued this order, this kind of custom of fratricide in response to that. So scholars were, majority of scholars did not agree with this fatwa. And even this wasn't a fatwa, this order. And even Sultan Fatih himself, in the text of the edict which issued this, the edict he issued says that by agreement of the majority of scholars. So he could not say, you know, that this is Shari'i. He said majority, which was not true, but in any case, he said it in that sense. Then Sultan Bayezid, Fatih's son, did not apply this new edict, and Sultan Jem, Bayezid's brother, escaped and sought refuge in Rhodesia, where the Templar Knights used to live. And because of this, the Ottomans could not engage in any significant military activity. And then when Sultan Bayezid passed away, Sultan Selim, his son, and his other sons, Korkut, Ahmed, engaged in civil war again. And then Sultan Selim did not have sons in that sense, so Sultan Suleiman took the throne without issue. But then during Sultan Suleiman's reign, his sons also engaged in what could be, and there is a lot of speculation, but the Ottomans at that time thought that they were engaged in rebellion. So a lot of these princes were executed for that as well. So in this context, it became a kind of norm. Fratricide became a norm. Scholars were always critical of it, and poets were critical of it, historians were critical of it, and eventually, because of this criticism, the system was changed, and a new system was put in place during the reign of Ahmed II, where the princes, the Shahzades, were placed in captivity in the palace so that they couldn't rebel. So there was no civil war. And the rule of the Akbar and Arshad was placed so that whenever the existing sultan died, not all members of the dynasty had equal claim. Instead, the oldest member was next in line. So with this, you know, they removed the need for fratricide in that sense. But yes, it's a complicated matter, and I think it needs to be studied. There are some studies in Turkish, but yeah, I think we should understand the issue of fratricide as we shouldn't understand it as somehow negating the constitutional principles I have stated. There could be the Sultan could do illegal things. He could do illegitimate things. But the more important aspect is that the legitimacy of these actions were, in the end, in the long run, were determined by the words of the scholars. And I think the case of fratricide proves this point rather than disproving it. But yes, you're right, that the fratricide was practiced.
Wonderful. We have another question from Kasdina Damia. She asked, is it true that there was an attempt to close the door of ijtihad and taqlid became culture during the Ottoman period?
Yes. So we must understand what ijtihad is, what taqlid is, and the different meanings of these concepts. Because these concepts themselves had their meanings changed throughout the history of Islamic law. In the beginning, for example, when we speak about Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the meaning of ijtihad is a very expansive meaning. So it refers to the initial enterprise of creating the laws out of the text. So, and then this meaning of ijtihad was not applied to anyone after the establishment of the madhabs. So around the 4th, 5th century Hijri, this meaning of ijtihad was not followed. Almost nobody said that, you know, when somebody asked them, for example, such and such situation occurred, what should I do? Nobody said, usually people didn't say, you know, look at this Quran verse or this hadith, this tells you to do this. Instead, they said, look at this text, for example, the Hanafi text, Sarakhsi's Mabsut, it tells you to do this. So the scholarly community moved away. They considered that the great mujtahids had done the work of rooting the legal system in the texts. And after that, they did not want to go back to that kind of situation, because they saw it as a kind of chaotic situation where, you know, and it is a situation we have as well, that if when you open that door, so to say, then authority itself becomes very, the situation of authority becomes chaotic. And for the practical reality that the scholars lived in and what they observed, they saw this as a harmful thing. But certain developments happened later, and in the early 14th century, before the establishment of the Ottomans, legal scholars in the Hanafi madhab, for example, formulated more and more methods to derive the preferred meanings, preferred views in a madhab. For example, they used to develop certain rules saying that if it's a matter of buyu', a commercial matter, then you should apply the views of Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani. If it's one of the students of Imam Abu Hanifa. If it's a matter of taxation, you should apply the views of Imam Yusuf, another student of Imam Abu Hanifa. So they formulated these rules, and they call this adab al-fatwa. So it became more systematic. The process by which somebody gave a fatwa became more systematic. So the meaning of ijtihad in this context changed. The meaning of ijtihad in this context and the meaning of fatwa became how the tradition was negotiated with present realities. So the first meaning of ijtihad could be the constitution of the tradition itself. So once that happened, the scholars did not want other authorities to be, for example, imagine a modern state, you have a constitution, and then you have jurists operating within the scope of that constitution. If the constitution allowed the jurists to interfere at the constitutional level, then what kind of chaos would that be? Then every jurist would be able to say whatever they want, and you could not appeal their views in that sense. And, you know, it just would be chaos. So in that sense, the initial mujtahid imams were like the founding fathers, which laid down the tradition, and following scholars, for them, ijtihad meant negotiating that tradition with present realities. Just as a modern legal scholar might negotiate the law of the country with the present realities, they were involved in that. So the scholars did not see it as a desirable thing to elevate every jurist to the level of like a constitutional jurist. They realized that, you know, that needed to be maintained. That distinction needed to be maintained. So there was an element of that closing of the door, but for scholars, they saw it as of vital importance, as a good thing. And there is an article by Wa'il Hallaq called Was the Gate of Ijtihad Closed? I can recommend that article if you want to learn more about this topic. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess in the idea of closing the door of ijtihad was more to create balance between the modern system of law that has already in existence, so as not to create too many differences of opinion, considering the complexity of issues that the later community had to face. If it's right for me to say that.
Yeah, this language of the door of ijtihad was revived in the latter period of the consolidation period, where we saw how, if I go to the slide, where let me see. Yes, the Osman II, Ibrahim, Mehmed IV, and so forth, they tried to create a language of ijtihad, mujaddid. The sultans tried to portray themselves as, doing ijtihad. They were the mujaddid. They used to say things like, the Islamic law has become very stagnant, and they wanted to. So the scholars opposed the language of ijtihad and tajdeed because they saw it as a way for the political authorities to interfere in the internal working of the law.
Yeah. Okay. We have another question from, I think this is from Shakila, based on the initial she used. What were the sources of laws, authority in the Ottoman Empire?
Yeah, this is a very big question. And for that, the source of we need to understand that the law, as I mentioned in the beginning, was the Hanafi law. So the source of the authority was the kind of authority of Imam Abu Hanifa, as an immense figure of knowledge, as somebody who had knowledge almost in mythical proportions. And Imam Abu Hanifa's authority itself came from the idea that Imam Abu Hanifa was the most knowledgeable person regarding the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the meanings of the Quran. And of course, the Sunnah and the Quran acquire their authority from the fact that they are revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is all-powerful, all-knowing, created the universe, and sent guidance to humanity. So in that sense, this is the kind of logic behind how the law acquired authority. But to go into more detail, this is more of a theoretical level. To go into more detail, we can look at a certain risala, and like a small treatise written by Kamal Pashazadeh, who was a Shaykh al-Islam in the Sultan Suleiman's period. He was before three Shaykh al-Islams or two Shaykh al-Islams before Abu Suda Afandi. He authored, and this also goes into the question of taqlid as well to an extent, he authored a risala, a treatise called Tabaqat al-Fuqaha, the levels of the jurists, the levels of the fuqaha, the scholars. And in there, he said that, Imam Abu Hanifa is mujtahid mutlaq. He does ijtihad, itlaq. And then after him, there is mujtahid fil madhab, مجتهد في المسألة, there is أصحاب التمييز, أصحاب التخريج, and then there is مقلد, and then there is, and so forth. So he created these levels. And what was he trying to argue? This risala was actually as an appendix to a fatwa he gave. And in the fatwa, he said, his fatwa is the most authoritative because his fatwa derives its authority from scholars at different levels, where his opponents' fatwas derive their authority from scholars, mujtahids in the lower levels. For example, Kamal Pashazadeh, Ibn Kamal Pasha, he says, my fatwa is based on the views of this and this person, Sarakhsi and so forth, which are, you know, أصحاب مجتهد في المذهب or مجتهد في المسألة. Whereas your views, he was accusing the other side. He was saying your views are based on the views of somebody who's a muqaddid, let's say. So the authoritativeness of any view in the Ottoman Empire was negotiated with the tradition and the figures, the authoritative figures of the madhab, and they were considered successful. This negotiation was considered successful when the view was successfully attributed to one of the founding figures. For example, when Ibn Kamal Pasha was able to say, if Abu Hanifa was alive, this is what he would have said, then his view became authoritative. Then people listened to him. He said, you know, this is not Ibn Kamal Pasha speaking. He's just saying that if Imam Abu Hanifa was alive, this is what he would have said. So the authority, the source of the authority was this. And to explore this further, you can, there's a book called Authority, Continuity, and Change by, again, Wa'il Hallaq, which goes into this matter. There are other books in Turkish, but unfortunately, you know, they're in Turkish. But that book in English is something I can recommend. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, after 650 years of development, I think even the sources of law evolved as the development of the whole structure and the whole legal framework also changed. We have another question from Danya. She asked, can you explain more about the system of reform movement during the Ottoman Empire?
Yes. So I think the reform movement needs to be studied more. But it was, as I mentioned, it was in response to Ottoman defeats. And the Ottomans actually started to become aware of their kind of military, how can I say, inferiority towards in the 17th century. But it became a real issue, like a very pressing, undeniable issue in the 19th century and in the very late, especially after the Küçük Kaynarca Treaty, it became a really pressing issue. So the reform movement, as I said, it needs to be studied more, like the concepts they made reference to, who were their figures, but the reform movement was mostly spearheaded by figures in the Ottoman administration, government, and they were usually, you know, more bureaucratic officials, such as the viziers, such as the diplomatic figures, especially diplomatic figures who traveled to Europe and came back, so it was spearheaded by them. It was spearheaded by converts to Islam, like Ibrahim Mutafarrika, who was originally European and he converted to Islam. So these figures, they advocated for implementing European-style techniques of governance because they saw this as the only means to defeat the Europeans. And this was a gradual process. In the beginning, the first kind of treaty written on the need for reform I saw is from a scholar called Akhisari, who wrote it in like the 1601. He wrote it in 1601, and there, you know, he calls for reforms, but the concepts he appeals to are more so, you know, he appeals to siyasat names, he appeals to Mawardi style, he appeals to Persian epics, he appeals to idioms like Anu Shirwan in Persia, Alexander the Great, and he appeals to the figure of Sultan Fatih, Sultan Suleiman, So, later, this need for reform started to find its references from Europe itself, because, Napoleon, the Russians, their armies were more efficient. And eventually, the concerns leaked in from just being military concerns to started to concern themselves. The reformers started to concern themselves with the entirety of society, because it's not entirely wrong, because the way the military works, the concept of conscription, it requires a completely new form of subjecthood, citizenship, that the state can conscript you is a very novel thing. It was a very novel thing in the eyes of the people. So these reformists increasingly thought that the whole culture needed to be changed for the Ottomans to be able to compete with European powers. And eventually, this view, I don't want to say it was deterministic, that it had to be this way, but eventually, this is what took place in Turkey.
All right. We have actually our brother Adam, who would like to ask question straight away to you. Adam, you may unmute your mic and ask your questions.
All right. Bismillah. Is my sound clear?
Yes.
Right. So to be honest, I have a lot of questions in my hand. So let's begin with my first questions. So I've extracted the codification of legal news from your lecture, which is first about the Kanun names, and then the Mashallah. So is there any codification of legal news that's established or exists during the Ottoman period?
Thank you. So the codification of these dynastic norms in the form of Kanun did exist. It was an established practice after Sultan Mehmed II. As for the codification of Islamic law itself, the fiqh manuals served that purpose to an extent. So when, for example, a scholar like Halabi wrote Multaqa al-Abhur, this text, when it received grades, it was accepted widely. It became as if a legal manual. So scholars could open the book Multaqa al-Abhur, and or Ibn Abidin, for example, he has one of the latest figures. He has Hashia Radd al-Mukhtar. They could open this book and they could look at the rules it contained, and they could judge accordingly. But it is not entirely correct to call this codification, because the point of codification is to gather the laws and to determine which ones are to be considered law, which ones are not considered law. And this is done with the authority of it's done with political authority, the authority of the state. For example, when Multaqa al-Abhur was written, or Hashia Radd al-Mukhtar was written, it did not become, it was not, people followed it because of the authority of the scholar itself. They did not follow this book because somebody somewhere told them to follow it. And if they didn't follow it, then what they did would not be law, right? So in that sense, there is a difference. And there is another aspect or about codification and the Majalla. There was a movement in the 17th century, starting with Ibn Nujaym, and it could be extended to before Ibn Nujaym as well, where scholars would try to extract kind of universal principles from the texts. For example, they would the rules al-aslu fil ashya'i al-ibaha and so forth. These were already known. So there was a tradition of kind of extracting generalized rules, and there is a book by a scholar called Necmettin Kızılkaya. I will write his name. This is I don't remember the exact name of the book. It's something like Universal Legal Maxims in Islamic Law, something like this. And he explores the development of this. But, you know, again, these were just, these were extracted from fiqh texts, and they were based on the authority of these individual scholars. They were open to debate, and they were negotiated in the same way I mentioned, which was the internal kind of rule of the madhab. Codification by an authority, positive law, the positing of law is, I think, the crucial distinction here between what happened in the modernization period and what used to be commonplace before. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Do you have any more question, Adam?
Yes, I have another 4 questions. Right. So thank you, brother, for the answer. So my other question, which about is there any enforcement of or body agency or unit like police that establish or exist during this period?
Yes, so there were different forms of what might be called police, but the term police itself is, if you read the history of the concept itself, it has a very peculiar history. It's about police was first used in terms of like economic rationality and so forth. I'm not going to go into that, but there were a few things which could be called police. First of these was every qadi at in a place that held a court had certain officers at his service, which were which was provided to him by the ruler, and these officers could, when there was a complaint, for example, I say that I sold you something but you didn't pay, then the qadi could tell the soldiers that the sultan put at his service. He could tell the qadi could tell the soldiers to go and bring that party to the court. Second, there was policing of the markets, and this was called the muhtasib, and this was also under the authority of the qadi. They would police the markets and check, if people are cheating. For example, there were rules regarding bread, that it has to be a certain grammage, it has to be a certain weight, it has to be a certain quality. Milk, if you mix water into it and so forth, and if this was detected, that person would be punished accordingly, maybe prevented from engaging in commerce in that market again. But the Ottoman administration worked in such a way that outside of Istanbul, if you imagine it like a municipality, the head of the municipality was the qadi. So the qadi controlled disputes. He investigated the markets. He, for example, when there were decisions about what to build, where, and so forth, the qadi used to take care of this. And to reflect this, in Turkish, in the Ottoman era, provinces like towns were called qaza. They were literally called qaza because wherever there was a qadi, it was an administrative unit, and these were called qada. So the qadis were very instrumental, and it goes to show, how I mentioned that the scholars really helped in terms of the administrative efficiency of the empire, that the empire needed these qadis, not just to, people come to the court and they educate, that the qadis were responsible for recording events, disputes, policing, and everything. So the qadis were also administrators.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Brother Fong, for the answer. Actually, my next question is based on the now slide that you present now, which is in the 1857 about the abolishment of the Waqf. Can you explain briefly or like about why it's been abolished? Because as we know, the Waqf or the madrasa is actually like a good thing. So why it's been abolished?
Yeah. So it was abolished because, the sultans in the Ottoman Empire before in the the waqfs were the social aspect. We say social state, right? Today, for example, when you go to a university, if it's a social state, the university is funded by the state, the healthcare is funded by the state, and services for the needy are funded by the state. So in the Ottoman Empire, this service was provided by the waqfs. When a sultan established a waqf, for example, or not just the sultan, the wives of the sultans, the sisters, prominent statespeople, and sometimes even, for example, Abu Saud Effendi himself established a waqf. Whenever people had money, they established waqf. For example, I studied at the madrasa in Üsküdar, and this madrasa was part of a wider waqf. The waqf had, at the center of it, it had a madrasa, has a mosque. Next to the mosque, there was a madrasa. There was a tekke, the Sufi lodge. There was a hospital. There was a soup kitchen. There was a caravanserai, like an inn. And then there was a Mekteb Sibyan, school for kids. There was, what else?
Even a business center, right?
Yes, and then there were shops. There were shops within the waqf as well, and the shops, the income from the shops funded the waqf. So this was how the Ottomans kind of implemented their vision of the social state. I mean, that's how they provided the services to the people. In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire wanted to adopt, just a second, sorry. Yes, sorry. The Ottoman Empire wanted to adopt European models of governance, and to that purpose, they wanted to centralize government. And for them, the waqf represented inefficiency. The waqf, every waqf was being administered by its own administrators, and they were spending the funds, and they had a salary they took from the waqf. And vast proportion of the lands of the Ottoman Empire were waqfs. We don't have exact data, but there is data from Algeria. When the French invaded Algeria, 50% of the lands of Algeria were waqf. 50% of the land were part of waqf. So the income of the 50% of the land was used in waqfs. You can see how immense the waqf was. So the modernizing figures, they saw this waqf as inefficient. So they wanted to abolish this, every waqf as its own administration. They connected all of them to the center, and they started to pay the salaries of so they used to collect all the income from these waqf lands and then pay the salary of all these people that used to normally get their money directly from the waqf. So they wanted to improve efficiency. They wanted to increase the efficiency of their government. So that's why they abolished the waqfs.
It's a kind of a centralization of power as well.
Yes, it's centralization of power, the expansion of the state domination. Because the waqf is autonomous, which is not acceptable in a modern state. Such an autonomous domain is not very desirable for the purposes of a modern state.
Yeah. Any further question, Adam?
Yes, I need for two questions. regarding the edict in 1939 and 1956, which is the Tanzimat and Islahat. Can you
Mhm.
actually explain the distinction between these two? Actually?
Yes, the Tanzimat edict was issued after another war, and it made the non-Muslim citizens of the empire, non-Muslim subjects of the empire, equal to Muslim subjects. So it didn't have a lot of things inside it, but it characterized the period, right? But the most important thing, which was mentioned in the Tanzimat edict, was that the non-Muslim population would be considered equal to the Muslim population. And normally, before that, the non-Muslims used to pay the dhimma tax, and they didn't serve in the military. And they had their own legal codes and so forth, because they were considered like different communities had different laws, the millet system. As you can see, as we talk, there are many things that we haven't discussed, which are very important, but unfortunately, I didn't have the time. So I'm glad you are asking these questions. So the Tanzimat edict made them equal and abolished dhimma. So now all the citizens of the empire had to serve in the military, and they could acquire political positions. So the Ottomans did it on the behest of European powers, with the assumption that it would actually be appreciated by the minorities, but the minorities actually did not like it, because they preferred to pay the tax and not do military service, especially in a period where the Ottomans were often losing, and there were many civil wars between the minorities were rebelling in Serbia, in Greece, mostly in Serbia and Greece. The Armenians hadn't revolted by that time. So the minorities, they were not actually happy with that. But that was the beginning. And this was the beginning when the non-Muslim citizen and the Muslim citizen is made equal under the law. Normally the Sharia is for the Muslim subjects, and the non-Muslim subjects have their own law. So this was the beginning of the kind of the rise of the Nizamiya courts I mentioned, which advocated according to a state code and so forth, were all rooted in that. So the Islahat edict, on the other hand, it was again made at the behest of the European powers and the Serbian independence movement and the Greek independence movement, which actually made the non-Muslim citizens of the empire, subjects of the empire, superior to the Muslim subjects of the empire. How? The non-Muslim subjects of the empire could either serve in the military or they could pay a tax to be exempt, whereas the Muslim subjects had to serve in the military. Second, the Muslim subjects of the empire could choose to use the secular courts, and they could even appeal to the consulates of the French, the British consulates, who declared their protectorates above these people, these minorities, and they had at their disposal more legal avenues to pursue their benefits, whereas the Muslim population was kind of left with they had to follow the Sharia system, the old system, whereas non-Muslims always had options. They could either follow the Sharia system, the traditional classic system, whatever remained of it, or they could just follow the secular system, or they could appeal to the embassies of these European powers and so forth. So this is a very rough overview of what the two edicts represent. I hope that was helpful.
We'll take, if you don't mind, we take one last question, if it's okay with you.
Yes, that's okay.
Yes, Adam, you have, or any other person who would like to ask question?
Yes. This is my last question. Can you go back to the slide of the hierarchy significance that you state about the Sheikh Adabadi and Abu Sud Effendi? Right. So where's the slide? I'm so sorry. The hierarchy significance Okay, between these two
Oh, the
scholars.
hierarchy
So
significance.
yes.
Just a
So you
second. Yes.
yes. Yes, this slide. So at the last line, you say that it has the relationship between the Sharia and the Qanun. So
Yeah.
I missed the point. So can you explain it again? Sorry.
Yes. That of course. So the qanuns, as I mentioned, were actually kind of codifications of the customs of the Ottomans. For example, the Ottomans had a custom of appointing judges according to the rank of the position. For example, they used to first appoint the judge into a small town, and then they used to move to a larger town, move him to Istanbul, or they used to appoint a professor at a madrasa to a smaller madrasa, larger. But this was not official. For example, the Sultan, if he one day decided that he personally likes a scholar, and he's going to move him from, if we go to the hierarchy, from the lower levels of the hierarchy, for example, the 40 Akçe or Ibtidai Hariç, to the top, to make him Qadi of Istanbul, for example. Because it was not codified in that sense, the Sultan could presumably do that. But once the qanuns were issued, it solidified these customs, and it wrote them down, and it made them a reference point. And this is one of the benefits of writing down things, writing down laws, which you see in the debates between written and unwritten constitutionalism, is that once you write them down, they become more solid reference points. That's one of the benefits. So the ulama, usually, whenever they saw that there was something that they didn't like about the functioning of the system, for example, the system of the internship I mentioned, they saw that scholars from abroad could come and suddenly take positions. So then the young scholars from Ottoman madrasas, they complained to the Sultan. They said, we've been studying here, we need jobs, and then you come and you appoint these people who come from abroad to these institutions, whereas we've been waiting for appointments for so long. So then what happened? The Sultan, in response to their demands, issued an edict, a qanun, saying that to be appointed to this place, first you have to go through a period of internship, and to be intern you have to graduate from a madrasa, you have to be sponsored by a senior scholar, and so forth. So they created a system like that. So the ulama liked the qanuns. They saw it to their benefit. They thought that if the qanuns did not exist, then the sultans would be able to do whatever they want. Because the Sharia does give the Sultan, some movement space. So the ulama saw it as a good thing that the qanuns were being formulated, because it limited the movement space of the Sultan. For example, there were qanuns about guild members, and that gave them privileges, saying that the shoemakers can choose to decide who can produce shoes, what kind of shoes can be sold for what kind of money. But then the guild members were protected by the qanuns. When the reformer sultans started to engage in the reforms, the guild members, they used to complain, you made a promise that it's in the qanun that Fatih Sultan Mehmed, the great figure, made a promise, then you cannot go against it. So it was a form of self-binding, which is, when you look at the root of it, it's constitution, that the power binds itself, in that sense. So the ulama, the Janissaries, for example, the Janissaries had many qanuns saying that they would be given this much salary, they would be given this many days off, they would have this career paths and so forth. But when the Sultan wanted to abolish the Janissaries, or they wanted to reform the Janissaries, they wanted to make them do drills, they wanted to change their dormitory situations, they wanted to change which works the Janissaries could do with jobs they couldn't do. They wanted to interfere. The Janissaries were furious. They used the Qanun against the Sultan. So in that sense, for the ulama, Qanun represented the taming of political power. So without the Qanun, political power would not be constrained. It would be untamed. So they saw it as a vital thing. So they saw that the Qanun supplemented the Sharia. And they saw the Sharia and Qanun as working together to create the ideal government. Good Qanun together with good Sharia came together and created the ideal form of government. So that's why they didn't see a dichotomy between Qanun and Sharia. And
Well, thank
I
you.
hope that clarifies it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Furqan, for the explanation. That
My
was
pleasure.
really a 2.5 hours fact-loaded rich discussion that we had, and I hope that the students have benefited from it so much as I did. And I think looking back, if I can just share to conclude some of the biggest takeaways from your lecture here, I think it's very important for us to observe when it comes to the unique feature of the Islamic law during the Ottoman Empire would be the important roles of the institution of madrasa and how it significantly contribute to the emergence and the birth of more scholars who then after that continued to consolidate the Islamic law, particularly in the second stage. And I find it very fascinating to learn about the important role of Shaykhul Islam and how superior the role was to the extent that they were so powerful even when above the ruler or the caliphate at the time. Unfortunately, I guess that power degraded, or the system that was well established during that consolidation period were very much affected by the colonial power, which I think to a certain extent, this is where I find it interesting, where we also had a similar issue when it comes to our legal framework, how our Islamic law that used to govern the Muslim community, or rather the community in the Malay states back in those days, were very much affected by the presence of the colonial power, more so in Malay states when we were physically colonized by the British. But I guess you have brilliantly unfolded the significant historical development of the Ottoman history, the who's, the whens, the what consequences it brought to us, and how that had significantly shape the legal framework. There was actually a question by our brother that I just noticed. He actually asked, is there any reform movement that is currently taking place in Turkey as far as Islamic law is concerned? But I guess we leave that for them to discover, or maybe would you like to respond in 1 or 2 minutes?
Yeah, I just to say, it is the Republic of Turkey was established according to militantly secular principles, and today there is more freedom to speak about these issues and to advocate for Islamic perspective, but until recently it was illegal. It was constitutionally outlawed to bring discussions of Islamic law and to advocate for them. And it is not uncommon to see in Turkish history that people were executed on charges of irtija. Irtija means going back to the past. So people were executed on these charges. So, I mean, there is some freedom to discuss these things more under the current, more so Islamist government. I'm using Islamist very loosely. I'm not saying that they're Islamist in Islam, but that, they are more inclined towards Islam. So there's more freedom to discuss this, but still it is very, I think it would be very, it would be difficult to say that there is like a substantial movement for Islamic law in Turkey. There are movements to establish Islamic banks, there are movements to think about these problems, but there isn't a substantial movement for Islamic law in Turkey.
Yeah, I guess that's also probably contributed by the fact that the system is to a certain extent restricted by the presence of the constitutional provisions, which limit the freedom and liberty of the people to a large extent, I would say.
Yeah, the constitution enshrines secularism. It entrenches it. So to advocate for an Islamic framework would be considered unconstitutional. There can't be, for example, practically speaking, there can't be, somehow maybe there might be in a de facto fashion, but in a illegally speaking, there can't be a party in the parliament who advocates for Islamic governance or law. It would be unconstitutional.
Yeah. I guess to a certain extent, the same struggle we also face here in Malaysia, although of course Malaysia has this duality of system, a legal system running hand in hand. We have the Islamic legal system, we also have the conventional legal system, but to a certain extent, because of the limitation by the constitution, the Islamic legal framework can't operate in its full sense of the original Islamic law structure. Yeah, so I guess thank you so much once again, Furqan, for enlightening us with all the new informations. Some of it were very new to me myself, and I think it's also important for us if we were to understand the development of Islamic law of this more than 6 decades administration, to look at it not just from the legal perspective, to fully understand it and comprehensively understand it is also important for us to also understand the political aspect and political perspective of it, the power struggle and the social construct of people at that time in Turkey, more so if we were to extend the discussion or to look at the whole picture of the Ottoman Empire, which were not just centered in Istanbul. But with that said, again, Tashakkuruddin, thank you so much. Jazakumullahu khair. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank all the faculty members or our academic members who are here with us tonight. You have actually activated our curiosity and triggered us to learn more about the Ottoman Empire. Hopefully we'll be able to go and visit Istanbul, go to the Sulaimani complex and experience the vibe of the Sulaimani. When you
I would recommend if you can visit the tomb of Sultan Suleiman, visit the resting place of Abu Suud Effendi. Yes, you can visit the Topkapı Palace. You can see this image I showed of the Divan, the Divine Council. You can visit Topkapı Palace and you can see this. I hope everybody finds the opportunity to do so. I'm very thankful for your invitation, and I actually feel that I am the lucky one. I am the one I should be more thankful, because I feel that it's an honor to be teaching about the Ottomans and teaching about Islamic law. And I thank you for giving me that opportunity to provide that, to be of that service. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for listening and your very beautiful, your fantastic questions. But I hope that what we have covered today motivates you to look into some of these concepts, maybe go through some books about the Shaykh al-Islam, Kazaskar, because I could only do so much. Now I guess the rest is up to you if you wish to learn more. But if you have any other questions, as I said, you can email me at the address I just put in the chat. It was my pleasure again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I hope that they will not harass you with too many questions. Thank you for your willingness to help our students, because they actually have some kind of further assignment that they will have to do to research more on this topic. So inshallah, I hope to see them develop further and had more understanding about the Islamic law during the Ottoman Empire. With that, I thank you so much once again, Furqan. I look forward to collaborate with you in the future, perhaps in other type of works, inshallah. And we wish you the best of luck with your research.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. With that, we end our session today with Tasbih Kafara and Suratul Asr, and also to further extend our prayers to our brothers and sisters in Palestine. May Allah help them and give them safety and security and reward them with victory, inshallah.